Have you ever had the strange feeling of looking at a completely new place, face, or even situation and yet feeling with absolute conviction that it is familiar? As if something inside you said, I know this, even when your memory can't pinpoint when, where, or why. This experience is more common than it seems, and if you've ever had it, stay with me until the end because what you're about to discover might surprise you. Imagine walking down a street you swear you've never been to, but it evokes an immediate feeling of recognition. Or meeting someone for the first time and, within seconds, feeling that this person has somehow been a part of your life. It's not exactly a memory. There's no past scene, no clear episode, no story recorded in your mind. There's only the feeling. Strong. Convincing. Almost impossible to ignore. Have you ever experienced this? For a long time, experiences like this were treated as mere coincidences, memory lapses, or even something linked to mysticism. But neuroscience shows that what is happening is much more intriguing. The human brain is capable of generating familiarity without memory, a real, measurable sensation deeply connected to how we perceive the world. And the most curious thing is that, most of the time, we fully trust this sensation, even without any concrete proof that it is true. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns extremely quickly. Even before you consciously realize what you're seeing, it has already analyzed shapes, colors, movements, sounds, and contexts. This rapid processing creates mental shortcuts that aid in survival, decision-making, and adaptation to the environment. However, these shortcuts don't always work perfectly. Sometimes they generate something curious, a feeling of familiarity that arises on its own without being linked to a real memory. That's exactly where the mystery begins. Because, to our conscious mind, familiarity and memory seem the same thing. If something seems familiar, we automatically assume we've experienced it before. But the brain doesn't work that simply. It separates, in different systems, the rapid recognition and the retrieval of detailed memories. And when these systems don't align, the result is that strange, almost disconcerting feeling of knowing something without knowing where it came from. What's most fascinating is that this feeling doesn't happen by chance. It's influenced by factors such as attention, emotion, context, and even your current mental state. In moments of stress, fatigue, or distraction, the brain tends to rely even more on these automatic shortcuts. It's as if it were saying, this seems familiar enough, so it must be safe, known, predictable. Even if it isn't. And that's precisely why this experience is so compelling. Familiarity breeds comfort. It reduces uncertainty. It makes the world seem more organized than it really is. The problem is that when the brain creates this sensation without a corresponding memory, it delivers a perception that seems true, but may only be an internal construct. A subtle, silent, and extremely powerful illusion. As you watch this video, you might start to recall moments when you trusted that feeling without questioning it. Situations where something felt right, simply because it sounded familiar. And this raises a disturbing question. How many times in our daily lives do we make decisions, form opinions, or believe in something simply because our brain gave us that feeling of recognition? What you are about to discover will delve into exactly how neuroscience explains this phenomenon, why it happens, and what it reveals about how the brain constructs our perception of reality. From here, things start to get even more interesting. And perhaps, while all of this makes sense to you, some personal memory will begin to surface. A specific moment when this feeling appeared out of nowhere and kept hammering in your head. If this has ever happened to you, it's worth pausing for a second and thinking about how these experiences are more common than we imagine, and how we almost never talk about them. If this topic resonates with you, leave a comment below about what has touched you the most so far, or describe a situation where this familiarity without memory appeared unexpectedly. Reading about these experiences creates a powerful exchange and helps you realize that you are not alone in this. While you reflect on this, if the content makes sense, liking the video is a simple way to show that this type of topic deserves to continue being explored. This small gesture helps the video reach more people who, like you, have felt something strange in their own brain and never found a clear explanation. Your participation here is what makes this channel grow and reach more people with this type of content, and that really makes a difference. And if you enjoy questioning the mind, perception, and those silent phenomena that happen inside our heads every day, subscribing to the channel is almost an invitation to continue this conversation. Here, each video is a piece of a larger puzzle about how the brain constructs reality, often without asking our permission. When you subscribe, you show that you want to follow this journey and delve even deeper into this type of reflection. Because what follows begins to reveal something even more intriguing: how the brain manages to separate the sensation of recognition from the memory itself, and why this happens even when we are absolutely certain that we are in control of what we feel and remember. When we talk about familiarity, we almost always assume we're talking about memory. In common understanding, the two things are mixed up as if they were the same mental experience. If something seems familiar, then it must have been experienced before. If I recognize a face, a scene, or a sensation, my mind quickly concludes that there's a memory stored somewhere. But this is one of the great illusions the brain constructs, and perhaps one of the most impactful on how we make decisions, interpret reality, and believe in our own certainties. Familiarity is not memory. And the brain treats these two experiences as different processes, even though they intersect all the time. Memory involves the retrieval of a specific event, with context, time, place, and details. It's when you can say, "This happened to me," even if vaguely. Familiarity, on the other hand, is much more subtle. It doesn't bring clear images, doesn't tell a story, doesn't point to a past moment. It simply arises as a feeling. An internal signal saying, "This isn't entirely new." What's most intriguing is that this sensation can exist on its own. The brain is perfectly capable of generating recognition without accessing any real memory. It's as if it only activates one part of the system, leaving the other switched off. You feel it but you don't remember. You recognize it but you can't explain it. And yet, this experience has an emotional impact, influences choices, and shapes how you react to what is happening. This happens because the brain wasn't designed to seek absolute truth. It was shaped to function efficiently. Instead of analyzing everything from scratch, it works with shortcuts, probabilities, and quick comparisons. Recognition is one of these shortcuts. When something resembles already known patterns, even if only superficially, the brain signals familiarity. This signal doesn't depend on a concrete memory. It only depends on enough similarities to trigger the system. This is where many people go wrong. Because, from a conscious point of view, we trust this signal too much. Familiarity conveys a sense of security, control, and coherence. It reduces mental effort. Something familiar seems less threatening, more predictable, easier to deal with. And the brain likes that. It prefers the feeling of "I already know" to the discomfort of admitting "I don't know." This silent preference influences everything from small daily decisions to deep-seated beliefs about the world and about ourselves. Think about the impact of this. How many times have you trusted information simply because it sounded familiar? How many times have you felt something was true not because you analyzed the facts, but because that idea seemed known, repeated, comfortable? This mechanism doesn't only operate in strange brain experiences. It's present in how we construct mindsets, opinions, moral judgments, and even perceptions of who we are. Familiarity creates a kind of hidden truth. Something seems right even before it's verified. Behind the scenes, the brain works like this all the time. It separates "this sounds familiar" from "I remember this." But in subjective experience, these boundaries blur. The sensation comes first, the explanation comes later, if it comes at all. And often the explanation is just an attempt to justify something that has already been felt. That's why this feeling of recognition without memory can be so convincing. It doesn't ask permission. It simply appears. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding this difference completely changes how we perceive certain mental phenomena. Isolated familiarity is not a simple error of the brain. It is a direct consequence of how the cognitive system prioritizes speed, efficiency, and adaptation. In evolutionary terms, quickly recognizing something similar to past experiences was more important than remembering exactly when it happened. Accuracy came later. Survival came first. And this leads us to a broader reflection. If the brain can generate familiarity without memory, then not every feeling of certainty comes from a real experience. Some come only from the way the information was processed. This has a profound impact on our personal journey. It affects how we interpret signs, how we make important decisions, and how we react emotionally to new situations. Often, we believe we are acting based on memories when in reality we are reacting to a feeling constructed in the present. This mechanism also explains why certain experiences seem so real, even when we can't pinpoint their origin. The brain doesn't need a complete story to generate meaning. It only needs enough coherence to move forward. Familiarity provides this coherence. It creates an artificial continuity, a bridge between the present and a past that may not even exist in the way we imagine it. And the more you pay attention to it, the more you begin to realize how much this sensation influences your daily perception. Not just in strange or unusual moments, but in small choices, in quick judgments, in instant impressions. The brain decides the tone of the experience before consciousness even enters the scene. Memory may try to catch up afterward, but it doesn't always succeed. All of this raises profound questions about trust, truth, and perception. To what extent does what feels familiar truly stem from a memory? And to what extent is it merely the result of repeating patterns, similar contexts, and subtle cues being interpreted as something known? These questions don't have simple answers, but they open the door to important revelations about how the mind works behind what we call reality. As you absorb this, you might begin to look at your own experiences with different eyes. Not with distrust, but with curiosity. Understanding these behind-the-scenes aspects doesn't diminish the human experience. On the contrary, it expands it. It shows how sophisticated, and at the same time imperfect, the system we use to navigate the world is. Comment below, that makes sense to me. When we begin to understand that familiarity and memory are not the same thing, a new layer is revealed behind this seemingly simple experience. The brain does not operate as a single unit, doing everything at the same time in the same way. It functions much more like a network of parallel systems, each with a specific function, acting behind the scenes of what we call conscious perception. And that's precisely where things get even more interesting. Within the brain, there is a highly efficient system dedicated to quickly recognizing patterns. It is not concerned with details, context, or historical accuracy. Its function is to respond quickly. It identifies shapes, faces, sounds, environments, and situations that resemble something seen before, even if that resemblance is minimal. This system works almost automatically below the level of consciousness and kicks in fractions of a second. Before you even think about what you are seeing, it has already signaled. This looks familiar. In parallel, there is another system, much slower and more demanding, responsible for retrieving detailed memories. This one attempts to access more complete records. When it happened, where it was, who you were with, what you felt at that moment. It needs more energy, more attention, and more time. It is not always available. It cannot always respond. And, in many cases, it simply finds nothing to deliver. The key point is that these two systems don't depend on each other to function. Rapid recognition can trigger on its own, without memory retrieval following suit. It's as if one part of the brain turns on the light of familiarity, while the other searches in the dark for a memory that isn't there. And when this communication fails, the resulting experience is exactly that strange feeling. I recognize it, but I don't remember. This disconnect is not a rare defect. It is part of the normal functioning of the brain. In evolutionary terms, recognizing patterns quickly has always been more important than remembering complete stories. Identifying something as possibly known could mean safety, opportunity, or danger avoided. Detailed memory came as a complementary resource, not as the basis of the system. Therefore, the brain readily accepts working with incomplete signals. The impact of this on our daily lives is enormous, even if we don't realize it. Many decisions we make don't stem from deep analysis, but from an initial feeling of recognition. Something seems familiar, so it seems reliable. It seems consistent with who we are, with what we believe, with the mindset we've built over time. Only later, if necessary, does the conscious mind try to justify this feeling with arguments, explanations, or memories that make sense. This is where a hidden truth about how we think comes in. Often, sensation comes before reason. The brain creates an emotional and perceptual backdrop, and consciousness simply walks on top of it. When the two systems, the one for rapid recognition and the one for detailed memory, work in sync, everything seems logical. But when they don't, this strange emptiness arises, this gap that the mind tries to fill. And she fills it in. Not always with facts, but with coherence. The human mind hates narrative gaps. If something seems familiar, but there's no memory, the brain may simply accept the sensation as sufficient. It's not uncommon for it to create vague explanations, weak hypotheses, or even false associations just to maintain the continuity of the experience. This process happens behind the scenes, without warning, shaping how we interpret what is happening. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because understanding this dynamic changes how we see ourselves. It's not just about strange phenomena or curiosities of the brain. It's about understanding how our mental journey is built from systems that aren't always aligned. Familiarity can guide important choices, influence relationships, reinforce beliefs, and even sustain convictions that have never undergone real conscious verification. When these two systems don't communicate well, the feeling of certainty can exist without a solid foundation. And this doesn't mean mental weakness. It means the brain is doing exactly what it was trained to do. Simplify, accelerate, make the experience of the world more fluid. The transformation happens when we begin to realize this. When we understand that not every feeling of recognition needs to be followed blindly. This understanding changes the impact of experiences. Instead of assuming something is true simply because it seems familiar, space opens up for curiosity. For questioning. towards a more conscious mental stance regarding one's own decisions. It's not about distrusting everything but about recognizing that the mind operates with shortcuts, and that these shortcuts don't always lead to memory but only to sensation. The more you observe this process in action, the more you realize how present it is in small things. In opinions formed quickly, in instant judgments, in impressions about people, ideas, or situations. The brain recognizes patterns, activates familiarity, and moves on. Memory, when it doesn't keep up, remains like a silence that we almost never question. And it is precisely in this silence that many curious brain phenomena take shape. Sensations that seem profound, real, and intense, but that don't have a clear history behind them. They are not false in the sense of being consciously invented. They are constructed from this internal architecture, this division of tasks that works well, until the moment we begin to pay attention. When you begin to see what's behind the scenes, something changes. The experience doesn't lose value but gains context. You start to realize that the mind is a living, adaptive system, full of practical solutions that don't always prioritize precision. And this opens up space for new revelations about perception, identity, and reality. Write it in the comments. I'm on this journey too. There's a silent detail in this whole process that almost no one notices, but which has a profound impact on how we interpret the world. The speed at which the brain processes information. Not just what it recognizes, but how easy that is processed. That detail changes everything. This is where brain fluency comes in, one of the most influential, and least questioned, backgrounds of the human mind. The brain doesn't measure reality solely by its content. It measures it by the internal experience of processing. When something is processed easily, effortlessly, without friction, it generates an automatic feeling of cognitive comfort. And this comfort is quickly translated into familiarity. Not because there's a clear memory associated with it, but because the mental experience was fluid, simple, quick, and the brain loves that. This fluency can arise for various reasons. A simple visual pattern, a phrase with familiar words, an idea presented clearly, a face with common features, an environment with repeated elements of daily life. None of this needs to have been experienced exactly that way before. It is enough that the brain can process it quickly. When this happens, it interprets the experience as something known, familiar, reliable. The problem is that this interpretation happens before any conscious checking. The mind doesn't stop to ask, do I really remember this? Just feels. And this feeling carries emotional weight. It influences decisions, judgments, and beliefs. Something that flows smoothly seems true. Something that requires effort seems strange, doubtful, or wrong. It is at this point that the brain confuses speed with truth. This mechanism is not irrational. It is efficient. In a complex world, the brain needs to filter information quickly. If everything required deep analysis, the mind would collapse. Fluency acts as a shortcut. If it's easy to process, it's probably safe. It probably makes sense. It's probably aligned with past experiences. The problem is that probably doesn't mean truly. This silent confusion shapes much of our mindset. Repeated ideas seem more correct. Familiar opinions seem more reliable. Simple information sounds truer than complex explanations. Not because they are better, but because they flow with less resistance. The brain prefers what requires less energy. And this preference happens behind the scenes without warning. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because when we understand brain fluency, we begin to see how much our certainties can be built on sensations and not on facts. The familiarity that arises from fluency does not depend on actual memory. It depends only on the subjective experience of ease. That's why something completely new can seem familiar. And something true yet complex can seem strange or uncomfortable. This dynamic directly affects how we perceive reality. It influences simple choices such as trusting or not trusting someone, and larger decisions such as believing in an idea, following one path, or rejecting another. Often we don't follow what is most accurate, but what seems most natural to the mind. That which best fits existing patterns. That which flows. And this creates a hidden truth. Not every feeling of this makes sense comes from deep understanding. Sometimes, it comes simply from the ease with which the information was absorbed. The brain interprets this ease as a sign of familiarity, and familiarity as a sign of truth. This chain of events happens too quickly to be consciously perceived. By the time we realize it, the decision has already been made. It's important to understand that this doesn't make the human mind flawed. It makes it human. Brain fluency is a powerful tool for adaptation. It allows us to navigate a world full of stimuli, choices, and conflicting information. The problem arises when we don't recognize this mechanism in action. When we believe that our certainties always come from reason, memory, or analysis, ignoring the weight of sensation. The more you observe this, the more you begin to notice the impact of this process on your daily life. A simply stated sentence seems more honest. A straightforward explanation seems more truthful. An idea repeated several times begins to sound correct, even without solid evidence. The brain is not evaluating the validity of the content. It is evaluating the processing experience. This perception changes the way we look at our own reactions. Instead of simply asking, "Is this true?" a deeper question arises: does this seem true because it is, or because it was easy to accept? This simple shift in perspective already brings about a transformation in how we deal with information, decisions, and even our own convictions. And the most curious thing is that fluency doesn't need to be intentionally created. It arises naturally from repetition, context, cultural familiarity, and the language used. It infiltrates the mental journey silently. That's why the feeling of recognition without memory can be so strong. The brain isn't remembering anything specific. It's simply responding to the fluidity of the experience. When these mechanisms combine, rapid recognition, incomplete memory, and high fluency, the result is a powerful, compelling, and often indisputable perception. The mind feels it knows even without knowing why. And this feeling guides behaviors, choices, and interpretations with far more force than we imagine. As all of this falls into place, it becomes clear that familiarity without memory is not an isolated error. It is the natural result of a brain that prioritizes efficiency, speed, and continuity. Understanding this doesn't make us more distrustful of the world, but more aware of the behind-the-scenes workings that shape what we call reality. Write it in the comments. That makes sense to me. There is something profoundly human in the way the brain deals with the unknown. Much more than seeking correct answers, it seeks stability. It seeks to reduce uncertainty, lessen discomfort, and maintain the feeling that the world makes sense. That's why, when faced with something ambiguous, confusing, or incomplete, the brain prefers familiarity to admitting a simple, "I don't know." This choice is neither conscious nor rational. It happens behind the scenes as part of the mind's basic operating strategy. Uncertainty is emotionally costly. It demands effort, attention, energy, and, above all, tolerance for discomfort. For the brain, being without an answer means being on alert. It means admitting that you don't have total control of the situation. And, from an evolutionary point of view, this has never been a good position to be in. Throughout human history, the unknown has almost always been associated with risk. What was not understood could represent a threat, danger, or loss. So the brain learned to do something very efficient: fill in the gaps quickly. When an ambiguous situation arises, the brain doesn't stop and say, "I'll analyze this calmly." It tries to resolve the tension as quickly as possible. If there's no clear memory, it offers a feeling. If there's no certainty, it provides familiarity. This feeling acts as a cognitive anesthetic. It calms. It organizes. It creates the illusion of predictability. Even if it's a fragile construct, it's enough to reduce the discomfort of, "I don't know." It's important to understand that, for the brain, feeling familiar is already a form of response. It's not the most precise response, but it's the most comfortable. It allows us to move forward, make decisions, act, and react. The mind prefers an imperfect explanation to a void. It prefers a plausible truth to an absence of meaning. And this preference profoundly shapes our mentality, our choices, and how we interpret reality. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this dynamic isn't limited to strange brain phenomena. It permeates our entire mental journey. It's present when we form quick opinions, when we judge people, when we accept ideas, when we reject information that challenges what we already know. Familiarity acts as an emotional shortcut. Something sounds familiar, it seems safe. If it seems safe, it seems correct. And if it seems correct, it's rarely questioned. This mechanism generates a silent but powerful impact. It creates a feeling of control even when control doesn't exist. The brain feels it understands the situation even when it doesn't. And that feeling is enough to keep going. The hidden truth here is that we don't just seek to understand the world. We seek to feel we understand it. The difference between these two things is enormous but rarely perceived. From an evolutionary standpoint, this made sense. In unpredictable environments, quick decisions were more important than perfect decisions. Recognizing something as familiar, even if inaccurately, could mean survival. The cost of making a mistake was less than the cost of hesitating. This pattern has been ingrained in how the brain operates to this day. But the environment has changed, and the brain continues to use old strategies to deal with modern challenges. The result is that, often, the mind creates an internal narrative simply to avoid the discomfort of doubt. It prefers to believe that it already knows something, that it already understands it, that it has seen it before. Familiarity acts as a psychological glue that keeps experience cohesive. Without it, the world would seem fragmented, chaotic, difficult to interpret. With it, everything seems more organized, even if this organization is, in part, illusory. This illusion is not a problem in itself. It only becomes problematic when it goes unnoticed. When we believe that every feeling of recognition comes from a solid foundation. When we confuse comfort with truth. When we stop questioning why something feels right. The transformation begins when we understand that the brain is not committed to absolute truth, but to the continuity of experience. This perception changes the relationship with one's own mind. Instead of assuming that all internal certainty is reliable, space emerges for curiosity. To observe one's own reactions. To perceive when a feeling of familiarity is replacing a deeper analysis. This doesn't mean living in constant doubt, but recognizing that "I don't know" is also a valid, and often more honest, position. The brain avoids saying "I don't know" because it interrupts the flow of experience. It creates a pause, a void, a feeling of lack of control. Familiarity, on the other hand, keeps everything moving. It allows the narrative to continue. The mental journey to proceed without interruption. Even if, to do so, it is necessary to accept an incomplete explanation or a feeling without a clear origin. The more you observe this pattern, the more you realize how it appears in different areas of life. Not just in strange experiences, but in important decisions, in old beliefs, in ideas that have never really been questioned. The brain prefers to feel it knows rather than admit it doesn't know. And this preference shapes how we see the world, others, and ourselves. This understanding does not diminish the value of human experience. On the contrary, it reveals how sophisticated the system we use to navigate reality is. A system that prioritizes comfort, continuity, and meaning, even when accuracy is not guaranteed. And realizing this opens up space for a more conscious look at one's own perceptions. As all of this falls into place, it becomes clearer why familiarity without memory is so compelling. It doesn't arise from nothing. It stems from the brain's deep need to avoid uncertainty and maintain a sense of control, even if that control is only a momentary construct. Comment below, that makes sense to me. At some point in life, almost everyone has experienced a situation where familiarity appeared as a silent certainty, and only later did doubt arise. You look at someone in a public setting and feel, with conviction, that you know that person. The face seems intimate, the features evoke recognition, the feeling is almost automatic. But, no matter how hard you try to remember, nothing comes to mind. No name, no context, no story. Yet the feeling remains. And, for a few seconds, it is strong enough to influence your behavior, your posture, even your decisions. This happens because the brain doesn't need a real memory to create recognition. It works with patterns. A face may seem familiar because it shares characteristics with many others seen throughout life. The shape of the eyes, the expression, the way of moving. The rapid recognition system identifies similarities and triggers the sensation. The memory system tries to keep up but finds nothing. Even so, the sensation has already occurred. And it is convincing. The same thing happens with places. Entering a new environment and feeling like you've been there before is more common than you might think. A street, a building, a room. Sometimes, a combination of light, space, and architecture is enough to trigger familiar patterns. The brain recognizes the overall structure, not the specific details. It compares the present with fragments of past experiences and concludes, this fits. This conclusion isn't accompanied by a clear memory, but it is accompanied by a feeling of belonging. As if that space were part of your history even if it never was. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because these seemingly simple examples reveal something important about how we construct reality in our daily lives. Familiarity not only colors strange experiences, it influences everyday judgments, often without us realizing it. One of the most powerful examples of this is in how we handle information. How many times have you heard a statement and thought, that makes sense, even without knowing exactly why? Sometimes the idea isn't accompanied by data, evidence, or solid arguments. Yet it sounds right, familiar, comfortable. This happens because the brain associates repetition and fluency with truthfulness. The more information is presented, the easier it becomes to process. And the easier it is to process, the more familiar it seems. The brain then interprets this familiarity as a sign of truth. This is one of the most influential behind-the-scenes aspects of human decision-making. Many beliefs don't hold up because they are true but because they are familiar. They are part of the mental environment in which we grow up, the conversations we hear, the ideas that circulate around us. Familiarity creates a sense of solidity, even when the foundation is fragile. And this has a direct impact on how we choose, judge, and position ourselves in the world. This mechanism also explains why changing mindsets is so difficult. New ideas require effort. They don't flow as easily. The brain finds them strange, resists them, questions them. Not because they are false, but because they break familiar patterns. Old ideas, even if mistaken, flow easily. They seem right simply because they were already there. This difference in fluency creates the illusion that the known is better, more reliable, more true. In everyday life, this manifests itself in subtle ways. We trust people who seem familiar to us more, even without a concrete reason. We accept opinions that sound aligned with what we already think. We reject information that challenges our certainties, not because it is wrong, but because it requires internal reorganization. Familiarity acts as an invisible filter, shaping how we interpret everything around us. The impact of this is profound. The feeling of familiarity can guide important decisions without passing through the filter of conscience. Career choices, social judgments, moral stances. Often, we believe we are being rational when in reality we are simply following the path that offers the least mental resistance. The brain prefers what keeps the internal narrative intact. What doesn't require deep revisions? What preserves the feeling of continuity? This is one of the great revelations about the human mind. It is not always in search of the most precise truth, but of the most coherent experience. Familiarity helps maintain this coherence. It connects the present to a perceived past, even when that past does not exist in the way we imagine it. And this connection is enough to generate emotional security. When we begin to observe these examples in our daily lives, something changes. Everyday experience gains a new layer of meaning. We begin to realize that not all certainty comes from memory, and not every feeling of recognition deserves automatic trust. This doesn't mean distrusting everything, but developing a more refined attention to our own internal processes. Transformation happens when we understand that familiarity is a powerful tool, but not an infallible one. It brings us closer, organizes us, simplifies us. But it can also deceive us. And recognizing this doesn't weaken our decisions. On the contrary, it makes them more conscious, more aligned with what we truly know, and not just with what seems familiar. As these examples accumulate, it becomes easier to see that familiarity without memory is not a rare or isolated phenomenon. It is intertwined with how we interpret faces, places, ideas, and truths. It acts silently, influencing our mental journey and shaping the reality we believe we are living. And when we begin to see this clearly, a natural curiosity arises about what else happens behind these sensations. About how other internal factors can distort, reinforce, or even create experiences that seem absolutely real, even when they have no concrete basis. Write it in the comments, I'm on this journey too. When we begin to connect all these dots, familiarity without memory ceases to seem like an isolated phenomenon and becomes part of something larger. It fits into a set of strange brain experiences that, at first glance, seem disconnected, but in fact share the same silent basis. This is where phenomena such as déjà vu, false memories, and that unsettling feeling that reality is repeating itself come in. They all arise in some way from this imperfect relationship between recognition, memory, and perception. Déjà vu is perhaps the best-known example. The experience is intense, almost impossible to ignore. For a few seconds, everything seems strangely familiar, as if you were reliving a moment already experienced. The sensation is so convincing that the body reacts even before the mind can question it. Only then comes the confusion. You know that it didn't happen before, but the sensation insists on saying otherwise. This internal conflict is not a random error. It is the direct expression of familiarity arising without the support of a real memory. At that moment, the brain recognizes the scene, context, or situation too quickly. The recognition system kicks in, cognitive fluency is high, but the memory system can't find a corresponding record. The result is this paradoxical experience, feeling like you know even though you know you don't. Déjà vu doesn't create a complete false memory. It creates an isolated sensation of recognition, which is short-lived but leaves a strong emotional impact. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because déjà vu is just the tip of the iceberg. The same logic appears in false memories, experiences in which we are absolutely certain that something happened in a certain way, when in fact it didn't. These memories don't arise from nothing. They form when familiarity mixes with real fragments, assumptions, and mental reconstructions. The brain fills in gaps to maintain a coherent narrative. Memory doesn't function like a faithful archive. It's reconstructed each time it's accessed. And in this process, familiarity plays a central role. If an idea, image, or story sounds familiar enough, it can be incorporated as if it were a legitimate memory. The brain doesn't rigorously verify the origin. It prioritizes internal consistency. The result is memories that seem solid, emotional, and true, but that don't exactly correspond to the facts. This dynamic helps explain why so many people defend contradictory memories with the same conviction. It's not just stubbornness or bad faith. It's the brain protecting its own narrative. Admitting that a memory might be wrong generates discomfort, breaking the sense of continuity. Familiarity acts as a stabilizer, reinforcing what already seems known, even when it isn't. The feeling of reality repeating itself follows the same path. At certain times, especially under stress, fatigue, or emotional overload, the brain begins to interpret similar stimuli as if they were the same event happening again. Days that seem the same, situations that sound repetitive, conversations that give the impression of having already happened. It's not that reality is literally repeating itself. It's the brain saving energy, grouping similar experiences under the same feeling of familiarity. This cognitive economy has a profound impact on the perception of time and experience. When everything seems too familiar, reality loses its novelty. The days become blurred. The personal journey seems stagnant. And, curiously, this doesn't happen because nothing changes, but because the brain stops registering differences attentively. It recognizes patterns, activates familiarity, and moves on as if it already knows what comes next. These phenomena, when observed together, reveal a hidden truth about the human mind. The brain does not seek to record the world with absolute precision. It seeks to create a continuous, comprehensible, and emotionally bearable experience. Familiarity is one of the main tools for this. It connects events, smooths transitions, and reduces the impact of the unknown. But, at the same time, it can generate powerful illusions. Throughout this journey, you may realize that these themes intersect naturally. Déjà vu, false memories, a sense of repetition, recognition without memory. They are all part of the same system trying to maintain coherence in a complex world. They are not isolated flaws. They are consequences of a highly adaptive brain that prefers to construct meaning rather than leave empty spaces. This connection between phenomena reinforces something important. We are not talking about disconnected curiosities, but about a recurring pattern in the functioning of the mind. A pattern that appears in different contexts, with different intensities but always with the same background. Rapid recognition, incomplete memory, and a deep need for continuity. When you begin to see these connections, something transforms in the way you interpret your own experiences. Moments that previously seemed strange or inexplicable become part of a larger picture. The mind ceases to seem like a chaotic mystery and begins to reveal its inner workings. And the clearer these inner workings become, the more a natural curiosity arises about what has not yet been consciously observed. These phenomena also help to build a sense of thematic authority. They show that familiarity without memory is not just an abstract concept, but a key to understanding a range of profound human experiences. Experiences that transcend culture, age, context, and personality. Experiences that are part of virtually everyone's life, even if few people stop to reflect on them. As this understanding deepens, it becomes evident that there are still important layers to explore. Layers involving specific areas of the brain, more precise neurological mechanisms, and explanations that go beyond subjective sensation. All of this begins to point to a central region in this puzzle, an area that plays a fundamental role in how these experiences arise and are organized internally. Comment below, I'm on this journey too. When we bring the perspective of modern neuroscience to all of this, many things begin to fit together more clearly, and, at the same time, more disconcertingly. For a long time, we were led to imagine the brain as a large archive, a place where experiences were stored intact, waiting to be accessed when needed. As if each memory were a video saved somewhere in the mind, ready to be played back exactly as it happened. Today we know that this is simply not true. The brain doesn't store experiences like files. It doesn't record reality faithfully, completely, and permanently. What it does is much more economical, and much more creative. It records fragments, signs, emotions, bodily sensations, general patterns. And when we need to remember something, it reconstructs that experience in the present moment, using what is available. Memory is not reproduction. It is reconstruction. This reconstruction happens so quickly and fluidly that we rarely notice the process. We have the feeling of accessing something stored away, when in reality we are assembling a coherent narrative from incomplete pieces. And it is precisely at this point that familiarity comes in as a powerful cognitive shortcut. When the brain doesn't have enough information to reconstruct a complete memory, it can only deliver the sensation of recognition. And often that's enough. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this idea completely changes how we understand our own mental experiences. Familiarity doesn't need to come from an actual memory to exist. It can arise as a byproduct of this reconstruction process. If the available cues, context, emotion, fluency, patterns, are similar to something already experienced, the brain generates the sensation of already known, even without accessing a concrete past event. From a neurological point of view, this makes perfect sense. The brain works with probabilities, not absolute certainties. It assesses how much a current experience resembles sets of previous experiences. If the similarity exceeds a certain threshold, the recognition system is activated. This system doesn't ask if the memory is real. It only signals compatibility. And this compatibility is felt as familiarity. This process reveals a hidden truth about the mind. Many of our inner certainties are not based on complete records, but on quick inferences. The brain makes bets all the time. It bets that something is known. It bets that something is safe. It bets that something makes sense. Most of the time these bets work out well. But in some situations they produce strange experiences, convincing illusions and sensations that are difficult to explain. Neuroscience shows that this is not a flaw in the system, but a central characteristic of it. Reconstructing experiences from incomplete signals is more efficient than trying to store everything. This reduces energy consumption, increases response speed, and allows for constant adaptation. The cost of this efficiency is the possibility of subjective errors. But for the brain, this cost is worthwhile. This logic helps to understand why two people can experience the same event and remember it in completely different ways. Each reconstruction is influenced by emotional state, current context, expectations, and experiences accumulated throughout the individual's journey. Memory is not a mirror of the past. It is a continuous dialogue between the perceived past and the lived present. In this dialogue, familiarity acts as a stabilizer. When the signals are confusing or incomplete, it offers a sense of continuity. It says, "This fits into your story." Even if that fit is approximate. Even if pieces are missing. The mind prefers an imperfect narrative to a meaningless gap. And this has a profound impact on how we construct our identity, our decisions, and our worldview. Realizing this generates a silent transformation in mindset. Instead of assuming that everything we feel as familiar comes from a real memory, we begin to see these sensations as clues, not as proof. Familiarity ceases to be an automatic confirmation and becomes a signal to be observed. This does not weaken the human experience. On the contrary, it makes it richer, more conscious, and more honest. The authority of modern neuroscience lies not in offering simple answers, but in demonstrating the complexity of mental functioning in an accessible way. The brain doesn't lie out of malice. It doesn't create illusions to deceive us. It does the best it can with limited information in an excessively complex world. Familiarity without memory is just one manifestation of this constant effort to create meaning. The more we understand this process, the more we realize that many strange brain experiences are not isolated glitches, but natural consequences of this cognitive architecture. They are part of the same system that allows us to learn, adapt, and survive. The difference is that when these experiences escape simple explanation, they capture our attention. And that's precisely where a new level of curiosity arises. If the brain reconstructs, infers, and fills in gaps all the time, what else might it be creating without us realizing it? What other sensations, certainties, and convictions might be the result of cognitive shortcuts and not real memories? This question opens the door to an even deeper investigation into how specific areas of the brain contribute to these experiences and why, in some cases, they become so intense. Comment below, "That makes sense to me." As all of this connects, a question begins to gain weight. It doesn't arise abruptly but gradually forms, almost like a silent unease. It appears when you realize that many of the experiences that seemed solid, reliable, and obvious may not have as firm a foundation as you imagined. Because, if the brain is capable of generating familiarity without memory, then there is something even deeper happening behind the way we trust ourselves. Much of our daily lives are guided by internal certainties. Feelings of "I know, this is how it is, this is true." We rarely stop to investigate where these certainties come from. We assume they are the result of experience, memory, and reason. But, in light of everything explored so far, it becomes clear that many of these certainties may arise simply from internal signs of familiarity. Not from facts. Not from concrete memories. Just from convincing sensations. Now I want to delve even deeper into this subject because this realization has a direct impact on how we perceive our own minds. If familiarity can emerge as a cognitive shortcut, if the brain reconstructs experiences from fragments, and if it prefers comfort to uncertainty, then blindly trusting one's own sensations can be riskier than it seems. Not because the mind is flawed, but because it operates with different priorities than we imagine. The brain wasn't designed to ensure you're always right. It was designed to ensure you keep moving forward. To make quick decisions, maintain continuity of experience, and sustain a coherent internal narrative. In this process, the feeling of certainty is a powerful tool. It reduces doubt, eliminates hesitation, and creates the impression of control. The problem is that this impression doesn't always correspond to objective reality. This is a hidden truth that we rarely confront. We prefer to believe that our decisions are the result of conscious analysis, when often they are guided by invisible shortcuts. We prefer to think that our convictions come from solid facts, when many of them come only from repetition, fluidity, and familiarity. This difference is not comfortable, but it is transformative. It changes the way we see our own judgments. Think about the impact this has on your personal journey. How many choices have you made simply because something seemed right? How many times have you trusted an initial impression without questioning it? How many opinions do you hold today because they sound familiar, not because they have been truly investigated? These questions are not intended to generate extreme distrust, but awareness. A closer look into the inner workings of your own mind. When we understand that the brain can create certainty without memory, we begin to realize that not every conviction deserves the same weight. Some are momentary constructs. Others are the result of efficient, yet imprecise, mental shortcuts. This doesn't mean we should doubt everything, but that we can learn to differentiate between feeling and evidence. Familiarity from truth. Comfort from reality. This understanding generates a subtle shift in mindset. Instead of reacting automatically to one's own certainties, space opens up for curiosity, for observation, for an internal pause before assuming something is true simply because it seems so. This pause doesn't paralyze. On the contrary, it broadens awareness and strengthens decisions that are more aligned with reality, and not just with a feeling of control. The most interesting thing is that this reflection doesn't diminish the human experience. It deepens it. Recognizing that the mind operates with shortcuts, reconstructions, and inferences makes the experience richer, not poorer. It shows that perception is not a passive mirror of the world, but an active, dynamic, and often surprising construction. A construction that works well, until the moment we begin to observe it closely. This observation changes everything. From that point on, strange experiences cease to be seen as flaws or anomalies and become windows. Windows to understand how the brain creates meaning, continuity, and identity. Windows to perceive how familiarity can guide us but also deceive us. Windows to question how much of what we call certainty is, in fact, just a well-constructed sensation. And perhaps that's the question that really lingers. If the brain can generate familiarity without memory, if it can create the feeling of I know without a real event behind it, then how many of our everyday certainties are merely convincing sensations and not verifiable facts? How many personal truths are sustained more by the comfort of recognition than by reality itself? This question doesn't demand an immediate answer. It demands reflection. It demands time. It demands observation of one's own reactions, decisions, and convictions throughout daily life. And as this reflection deepens, other questions begin to arise naturally. Questions about which areas of the brain are most involved in this process, why some people experience these sensations more intensely, and how specific emotional states can further amplify or distort this perception of familiarity. This is where curiosity ceases to be merely intellectual and becomes personal. Because understanding the brain isn't just about understanding an organ. It's about understanding how you construct your own reality, make decisions, and trust your own certainties. And the deeper you look into these inner workings, the clearer it becomes that there are still important layers to be explored. Comment below, that makes sense to me. If you've made it this far, it's because this topic really resonated with you throughout the video. And that says a lot. These themes aren't just curiosities about the brain, they touch on how we perceive reality, make decisions, and trust our own certainties. If this reflection resonated with you, if at any point you thought this message was for me, leave that in the comments. You can write exactly that. I read them, and it helps me understand what kind of content is really making an impact here. If throughout the video you felt the conversation flowed, the ideas connected, and that it was worthwhile watching until the end, leaving a like is simply a way to signal that. Not as an obligation, but as a continuation of this exchange that has taken place so far. This type of feedback makes a difference so that this space can continue exploring topics like this, calmly, in depth, and with genuine curiosity. And if you realize that this type of content provokes you, makes you think and look at your own brain in a different way, subscribing to the channel is a natural way to continue on this journey. Here, each video connects with the other, always exploring the inner workings of the human mind and those silent experiences that almost everyone lives, but few people stop to understand. There's a video over here that perfectly complements everything we just discussed. Click on it and continue watching.